is a health and happiness solution for today's hybrid workplace. My name is Dr. Paul Cachoa, owner of PAR5 Physical Therapy here in Randolph, New Jersey, and I partnered with them to bring you an easy and educational workday session. So today's session is from road trips to recliners. It's combating stiffness and aches and pains with the summer traveling. So long flights, car rides, or just relaxing more during the summer can lead to stiffness in the hips, the lower back, and the neck. So in this session, we're going to be talking about how to offset the negative effects of prolonged sitting with mobility strategies and travel-friendly stretches. So you'll learn why prolonged sitting aggravates your spine and your joints. And we're going to go over some airplane and road trip specific stretches that you can do wherever you are, and mobility flows that you can do in a hotel room or even maybe a rest stop. And then the tools to take with you, either a mini band, a massager, a ball, a little preview of that. We're going to be talking about that in a moment. So a little bit about me. I got my doctorate in physical therapy from Mercy University in Dobbs Ferry, New York. I was just seeing somebody this morning, a client, and he was asking me, like, what do you have a doctorate in? I'm like, well, this is my doctorate. I'm a physical therapist. And then he asked me about, like, what does that mean? Like, can you prescribe medication and whatever? From a doctorate standpoint, we have a lot of schooling, 3.5 to 3 to 3.5 years, and we do these rotations. And basically, a physical therapist is I told him we're a movement expert. So anything that kind of involves movement, whether it be the musculoskeletal system, the nervous system, integumentary, lymphatic, a whole bunch of other stuff, developmental, we cover all of that in our undergrad, and then we kind of go out and then we pass the boards, and then you can get certifications. I'm a certified orthopedic specialist. I specialize in orthopedics and musculoskeletal injuries. I'm also a certified golf medical professional, golf fitness instructor. I'm also certified in dry needling, also in functional movement techniques, and I'm a level 1 CrossFit coach. So enough about me. Let's pull up the slides here and talk about what we're going to cover today. Here we are. Where's my camera? Boom. Here we are. So from road trips to recliners. Now, because I am a medical professional, I got to put up this slide here. Is my thing working? Nope. Now it is. Hey, so this is an important note that when we go over this stuff today, it is general information, but it's useful, it's helpful, but it's geared at a broad population. So if you're dealing with something specific, my disclaimer is make sure that you get a thorough physical exam to get to the root cause of that problem. But some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today may help. All right, your mileage may vary, but overall, we want to make sure that we put this disclaimer up. All right. Now, when we look at the body and we see how it functions and what do we need to do to kind of fix it or decrease aches and pains, I always pull up this video. The video explains that our body functions on this alternating pattern of stability and mobility. If this pattern is disrupted, and pain or injury is the result. All right, so I'm going to freeze it, pull it up here. So if we start at the foot needs to be stable, the ankle needs to be mobile, the knee needs to be stable, the hip needs to be mobile, lower back needs to be stable. So if you look at this pattern, that blue, red, blue, red, blue, red, all of those things need to take place. And oftentimes, if we have a tight area or limited mobility in one area, that can cause the segments above or below to reverse their roles and become unstable or a mobile segment. So just kind of keep that in mind. All right, so let's talk about joints. So this is like an example of a healthy knee joint. We're looking at two bones that are coming together, but they're not touching. There's a space in there, and it's covered in this sac, this synovial capsule, or this articular capsule. And there's synovial fluid in there. There's cartilage, you can kind of see how that is, and then some ligaments that kind of hold bone to bone together. And if we dive in, this space that's in between the joint has this synovial fluid, which is produced by the membrane inside on the inner liner of this capsule, okay? The synovial membrane. Now, this fluid, if you're not moving and you're stationary, say sitting for an hour or two watching a movie, the joints that do not move, that fluid, that synovial fluid that's in there becomes viscous. It becomes thick, like molasses, really thick. But the more you move a joint, the more that synovial membrane is stimulated to produce more fluid. And the more fluid you have, the more slick everything is. So basically, it's like a car without oil or with really new oil. We want more lubrication in the joint, so we want to have movement. Motion is lotion and all that stuff, use it or lose it, stuff like that, right? But essentially, this is one of the reasons why joints become stiff and feel achy when you don't move them. Basically, that sensation that you get is your body's way of telling you, hey, knocking on your brain and saying, hey, I gotta move. You gotta move my joints, right? Or move the joints. So the fluid becomes viscous, makes the joint stiff. You move, there's more fluid that's produced. You oil up the joint and it feels looser. So that's from a joint perspective. Now, there's other things around the body, like muscles. If you look at muscles, they're basically these strings of fiber or a connection of springs, right, that connect to bone. And when these springs contract or they shorten, they create movement as that tension gets applied to the tendon, which is attached to the bone. All right, so let's get a closer look here. So you can see how the muscle is made up of these little pockets, different types of units in the muscle, and they're separated by this, what's called their deep fascia in this picture. And then over on the end over here, it attaches to the bone via the tendon. All right, and with muscle, you don't contract the entire muscle when you do any specific movement. The amount of those fibers, every unit, they're divided in units from like, say, 1 to like 1,000. You contract only the certain number of movements that enables you to accomplish a task, right? Makes sense. Like the amount of force and muscle units that you're using to pick up a coffee cup is different if you're going to pick up a 20-pound dumbbell, right? So it's different. All right. Now this fascia, this is an important thing because fascia gives our body its shape and allows that tension that's created in the muscle, that shortening and moving of the muscle to be transmuted or transferred into the tendon, which ultimately creates movement. And if we go into this microscopic view of what fascia looks like, you can see kind of like those strands of muscle tissue there, and this web-like structure, the white stuff, that's fascia. And it fills in all the little gaps in between the fibers and in the little gaps of our body, in between muscle, underneath the skin. Muscle without fascia, it's disorganized. It's basically hamburger meat, So fascia is important. And you can see that it looks like a spider web, almost looks like a cotton, I don't know, cotton tissue paper that's kind of falling apart here. Now, that is under a microscope when they biopsy or take out the muscle. So this is not live muscle tissue. This is not live fascia. The next slide, this is what actual live fascia looks like. And in your body, fascia gets broken down and made throughout the day, constantly. These little stringy spider web stuff here gets stretched out, they get broken. They create the ability to create that tension like we mentioned earlier. So this is what it looks like in vivo, they call it. Inside the body, we have this tissue structure that's lubricated and it could slide and move. Now, oftentimes, again, just like with joints, if we don't move, stuff can become sticky. And you can see how it looks like when it's dried out. It doesn't look very mobile, but when it's moisturized and it's loose, that's what it looks like. It can move. Now, if fascia, these strands of fascia, they also fill in these gaps that we talked about. And if we look at this type of representation here, how that fascia is made like this interlocking lattice of connective tissue and framework. Inside that stuff is like an artery and a nerve there. So tightness in a certain area where that fascia can get bound down or tight, that could also create stiffness or that feeling of soreness. So what do? We're talking about moving joints around and moving soft tissue around. So those are two big things that create that joint stiffness and aches when we're traveling, because we're not moving around as much as possible. We're usually just sitting, trying to relax, and then stuck in one position for too long, getting dehydrated, not getting enough water in our system, and all of a sudden we get this stickiness in our fascia and stiffness in our joints. So what's the solution? You probably heard this term, self-myofascial release. And the picture has like this guy in several different positions using a foam roller and lying down on the foam roller. And that's one tool that you could use. And we got a whole bunch of different tools. Now, I want to show you, let's zoom in on this top left one here. So I'm going to put my mouse there. Hopefully you can see it. Oh yeah, there you go. So this top left one right here, this is a foam roller. All right, it's orange and it's hollow. Most of the time, foam rollers are kind of like look long and they're kind of blue or black, and they're solid. They're solid foam things that you can kind of roll around. But for our purposes, for traveling and stuff, you want to pack something that's packable, small. You want the short one, and that short one, because it is hollow, enables you to kind of pack clothes in there or socks or something like that. So that can go in the suitcase. All right. So we're going to go over some stretching. We talked about how, we want to go through a mobility flow. What do you need to do while you're sitting? So stretching and self-myofascial release. Okay. So what are we going to do here? What do we need? Let me put the 2-shot up here. So the first thing that we're going to need is a ball. And we talked about a foam roller, right? So I have some here. So I have my chair. And hopefully we got this on the camera. Cool. I've got this foam roller. Normally the foam rollers, they come in, what do you call it? They come in 3-foot segments. And this one's about, maybe 1.5 feet or a foot. And this one's hollow. So you can kind of see that. But it's not hollow big enough to kind of pack stuff in there. So, this is light. It's packable, but I think that orange one that I showed earlier on the previous slide, that's a lot more portable because it's thinner and it has like a larger hole in there. And then we've got a lacrosse ball. Do you need a lacrosse ball? I mean, you could use like a baseball, tennis ball. They actually make like trigger point release balls. They even have these that I have here. This one from Hyperice. It actually lights up and then vibrates. So I don't know if you can kind of see or hear that vibration. So sometimes the vibration can also help with reducing the discomfort that happens when you do something like a trigger point release that we're going to do right now. So let me get my list up, make sure I kind of keep on track here. So the bare minimum that we want to think about when we're trying to reduce soreness or aches with travel is every 30 minutes, and this goes for daily life too, is that every 30 minutes we got to change positions or move, right? So, sorry, we talked about how joints get stiff, fascia gets stiff. 30 minutes is the bare minimum. We got to keep moving, and we want to reverse the positions that we're in. So essentially, if we look at sitting, we have a flexed hip and a flexed knee, and if we want to reverse those positions, we go from a flexed position or a bent position to a straight position. So that's an example of changing that position. So kind of kicking your knees out, straightening them. I mean, like if you're on a plane or a car, there's just so much you can do to kind of extend or flex your knee or straighten and bend your knee. And if we look up top here, hips, hips remain flexed the entire time. So if you do have the ability to stand up on the plane, start moving when you're clear to do so, or take rest stops when you're in the car, getting from a flex hip position to an extended hip position, that's our change in position. So we reverse the adaptations and the tightness that happens. Now, let's just say you're stuck and the back feels stiff, the hips feel stiff. So the bare minimum that I would say, if you kind of like are stuck in one position, is to do what we call a slouch and overcorrection. It's where we move the pelvis and the spine and the head and neck in complete opposite positions. So if I slouch, and you can do this now if you're sitting down, if you just slouch, you get one position where the back is really rounded and you can bring the chin into your chest. So everything's kind of like in this curved flex position. And then we're going to go in the opposite direction. If I sit up tall, my pelvis tilts forward, I arch my lower back, I stick out my chest, my spine gets extended, and I can go into extension of my head and neck as well. And then you can do this slowly, kind of working through those positions. My hands are on my knees. I like putting my hands on my knees when I do this to add like a little buttress and control of this position. So as you're doing this, you're feeling the pelvis roll underneath you in the flex position, everything rounded, chin into chest. And then we go the opposite way, tilting the pelvis forward, arching the back in the opposite way, chest out, back straight, and head up to the ceiling. And if you want to, you can add in breathing because the lungs, the diaphragm, and the rib cage is also connected to your spine. We would like to improve breathing. We're going to, exhale as you go down into this flex position, big long exhale. And then an inhale as you open up the chest, back, and head. So this is the inhale, and then the exhale as you go down. So again, that kind of, activates your nervous system, your parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest and digest side of our nervous system, and also helps lubricate the spine. Now, what can we do for the hip to stretch it out in this position? So a couple things, mostly we can go into external rotation to really stretch out the glute muscles and the piriformis and those deep hip rotators. So you kind of cross your leg, kind of push this down. Those are a couple other things, or pull this up and across, just getting into positions and kind of actively exploring which ones feel tight, which ones feel restricted, and then kind of holding that maybe for a couple seconds. The bare minimum would be 30 seconds if you're going to do this, and then just breathe through it. And really, it's about feeling out your body. The more that you kind of feel out the joints and move your spine and your pelvis and your hip into positions that feel like a little bit of a stretchy discomfort, but immediately it should go away when you uncross, right? When you go to this position, you're back to normal. Now, we have the lacrosse ball. And then when you're seated, we talked about how, in the seating position, we can work on that fascia. And we want to create this like pressure gradient with the ball to kind of massage and move the fascia. So in the sitting position, if I'm stuck on the plane or the car, I could take my ball and put it right under my hip and then kind of just wiggle around like that, create that pressure gradient, reposition. And again, just like with the stretch, well, that's a good spot right there. Kind of feel where your body is a little bit sensitive, right? And you kind of work in that spot and then maybe go about 2 minutes per little trigger point, okay? It should not create any symptoms that kind of radiate down the leg. If we do that, we're kind of like on a nerve, right? But you should kind of feel, you can do the hamstring as well, kind of feel out where your body feels stiff. And you can also put this on your lower back, all right? So if I put it on my lower back, I'm going to be above my pelvic bone, my hip bone, to the side of my spine, and then, maybe below the ribs to start. You can kind of work that way and then kind of work our way up. A lot of times the neck and the shoulder blade up top here will get tight. So, you could use the ball and then kind of lean back on that, depending upon how high the seat back is. You can kind of sit in there and then kind of do the same thing, creating that pressure, or just using your opposite hand to kind of press and then roll that around. Now, they do make commercial massage guns that can travel, and you could use those massage guns like percussion and vibration type of stimulus and then hit those spots as well. All right. Now, the other thing that we want to be able to do is stretch out the front part of your hip. So this tends to be very tight on a lot of people that come in to see me with like knee or back pain because of this position where we adapt to this flex position. So this all depends on the environment where you're in. If you are able to kind of shift to the edge of the chair or seat and then drop this knee to get into this half kneeling position almost, it'll help to stretch out the hip. That's one version that you can do. And then breathe through that and try and hold that for 30 seconds. That's one way to kind of open up the hip, the muscles in the front, and stretch that out and reverse the position of the hip. Or you could do it in standing. Once you're standing, you could do this as well. And I'll show you on the right leg. I could elevate my foot on something, whether it be a box, a step, or whatever, making sure that this foot and leg stay still. I can extend through this hip. I could rest my foot on something, maybe hold on to the back of the chair or door handle or whatever, and then push my hip forward, and that will reverse that position there. And again, as I'm lengthening the side that was shortened in my sitting position, I want to breathe through that and hold that for at least 30 seconds. And because the hip joint is like this ball and socket joint, it has like these 3 directions of movement. It can go forward, backward, sideways, and rotate. When you're in these positions of stretch, you can play around with the direction that the hip moves into, so that you can kind of address where you are specifically tight, as long as you feel it generally in this front area. Now, the classic version is to do it in a half kneeling position on the ground. So if you've seen a bunch of my other videos, we typically get into the hip flexor stretch like this, where I'm situating my pelvis in this tuck position, what we call posterior tilt, contracting my abdominals and going forward. So once you reach your destination, I think that this would be a good stretch to get into when you get onto the ground. And you can also do this in the other version where I stand up. So let me see if I could turn this like this. Let's go here. And if I can't tolerate putting weight on my knee on the ground, we could do it in standing, where my knee goes on the seat. And I'm replicating the same kind of half kneeling position here, where my other foot's off on the ground and my shin is on the chair, and I'm facing sideways and I'm trying to stretch out my left hip in this position. So you can kind of see that on the camera. All right, so those are the different hip flexor stretches. Now, if we move to the back, we talked about how we can kind of work that out. And, you know, if you want to do this standing, that's fine too. You kind of grab a wall, find your spot, right? That's tight anywhere on your back, and then place it against the wall, maybe against a car if you're standing up at a rest stop, and then kind of work that area. If you don't have the gun, you have that hard surface of the lacrosse ball to kind of work through those spots. When we're doing some type of soft tissue work, whether it be a foam roller or a ball, we want to at least go for 2 minutes per trigger point. All right. And then for the foam roller, you're packing this up. You know, you could kind of see tons of videos online on how to use a foam roller, but simply, we just want to be able to kind of mash and roll the tissue that's tight, like, you know, like that picture that we showed earlier on the hamstring. You know, we can kind of sit here and then kind of elevate and then kind of roll through here. We can go to the hamstring there. We can do calf, right? One that I like to do is for the mid back, where if we're sitting, inevitably we get into the slouch position. We want to kind of reverse that curve. So I'll put the foam roller there, and, you know, either hands here or behind my head like this, doesn't matter. You kind of work through that mid back with the foam roller. You can lock the hips down and then kind of take your upper back and go backwards, stretching it that way, going segment by segment, going into the extension. I've reviewed this on a lot of the other classes that I did. So hands behind or hands here, getting those shoulder blades away from the spine, rounding the, you know, separating it so we create some tension into the tissue, and then you can kind of mobilize those joints. So that's one way to do it on the mid back with the foam roller and into the legs. So the next one I want to go over is some of these stretches that you do, mobility flows when you are at your destination. So one of the things I like, again, if we talk about big movements and reversing curves, we did the sitting, slouch, and overcorrection. Then we can do it in standing as well. You know, simply kind of bringing both arms up, reaching up to the ceiling, and then doing a folding over, and then kind of rounding out the back and touching your toes. So this is kind of like borrowed from yoga, you know, the sun salutation and this forward, you know, roll, just kind of getting into these positions, kind of extending the hips, extending the back, and then rounding the back, and then kind of going down to get a stretch. And then we can start to get more advanced, where if I go into this squat stance, I can go down and go into a bootstrap position, bootstrap squat, where I'm holding onto my toes and I straighten out my legs and I bend down. So now I'm working through a lot of hip and knee bend, a little bit of crack in my knee, and then extending, bending, and then coming back up. So going through that motion. So this is our bootstrap squat, kind of working through there. And again, 2 minutes of these mobility flows. And another one is called, the last one is called the world's greatest stretch. And basically the world's greatest stretch gets into this half kneeling lunge position. All right, the more separation I have between my foot and my knee, the better. And then I can have a couple different things that I could do here. I could drive my hip forward and then drive my hip back, getting stretches on different joints and muscle tissue here. And then I could also take this hand and then sweep it underneath, try and drive my elbow and shoulder to the ground, and then rotate up to the ceiling. So kind of combining those two movements as I'm going up and then rotating, and then I'll reverse and then do the other side, inside hand. All right, keep that in mind. The foot that's in front, that's the arm that I'm going to rotate up and out and then down. So now I'm taking everything in my hips, into my back, my neck, my shoulder, through large ranges of motion, through this mobility flow, or I can kind of go through here. You can keep your knee on the ground, or you can do it with your knee in the air, which is a little bit more advanced. But again, all of the things that we went through should not be painful or cause lingering symptoms. All right. So I think that's all the stuff that I went through. All right, so the question came up here is, can you show an alternate way to do that for those who are less coordinated? So I'm assuming that it's the world's greatest stretch that you have an issue with coordination. Certainly, it's easy. If we just on a roller on your back, okay. Well, the foam roller on your back, if you want to do this, I've had people do this on the back of a chair too. So essentially, we're using the foam roller as a tool to reverse the curve of our upper back. So if we think about, all right, so this chair is maybe about the right height. I'm going to scooch myself back as far as I can. And then I'm going to get in that same position. I'm going to put my hands here or hands here. I'm going to use the top edge of the seat to extend my spine, just kind of bringing my back, my mid back up and back as far as I can. And the limitation with a chair is that it's at a fixed height. So the beauty of the foam roller is that we can change the position to get that extension. You can do this on the bed if you wanted to, which is going to be a lot softer if you have trouble getting onto the ground. But essentially, if I go through here and I just sit back on it, right? The foam roller is on my back. It goes across the spine. It's perpendicular to my spine. My hips and knees stay in place. I've got two options. What do I do with my hands? My hands can go behind the head, so I support my head, or it can go across the chest, right? Doesn't matter. So if I want to put it back here, I'm just going to do a little bit of rolling. And as I roll, I lift up my hips, and then that allows me to kind of go back and forth. Now, the first time that you do any soft tissue work and you find a trigger point, it's not going to be comfortable. It's going to be a little bit uncomfortable. You don't want to stay on it for too long, but as you roll over it and kind of explore which body part, which tissue is a little tight, the more you do it, the less painful it gets. And then that second piece of reversing that thoracic curve is basically dropping the hips, keep them there. Everything on this side of the foam roller stays still, and then everything on this side of the foam roller will go backwards. So I just kind of gently kind of take my head and shoulders backwards, trying to keep everything on the opposite side, the downside of my foam roller, stationary. So I repeatedly do that, go gently into there, and then I could reposition it to maybe a little lower on my spine and do it there, or I could reposition it to a higher position and do it there. So as long as you feel comfortable and it's controlled and it doesn't feel sketchy or create any sharp pain, you can explore actively these parts of your body to loosen them up and keep them mobile. Alrighty? All right, so hopefully that helped. All right, so any other questions before I shut it down for today? All right, let's see, got the chat going. Okay. All right, so everybody, thank you for joining me today. You can look for this session and many more on demand on the Better Spaces apps or the website. So I'll be back Tuesday, August 26th, So that's the end of August. August 26th to Tuesday, we're going to be talking about fall prep, backpack, sports, and back pain in youth athletes. Okay, so the fall session, as the school year begins and people prep for it, many young athletes return to sports while also carrying heavy backpacks and return to school. So this session, we're going to be focusing on protecting the younger spines with smart strategies from a physical therapy perspective. We'll go over how backpacks and poor posture affect spine development, injury prevention for fall sports like football, soccer, field hockey, movement screens every youth athlete should go through, and recovery and mobility drills to build resilience. And maybe we'll go over some tips for parents to recognize early signs of overuse stress. Alrighty? So if you have any questions, you can feel free to email me here at paul@par5pt.com or team@betterspaces.com. All right, thank you for coming and be well. Have a great day.